The automatic piano, music played by machinery. It really isn't much of a substitute for the human hand and the infinite variety of musical touch, as I think you'll agree if I put on a human performance of something romantic. I think I'd better come clean and tell you that performance came from a mechanical piano. Or to be more precise, it came via the mechanical piano from the human touch. The piano reproduced with remarkable faithfulness the way the pianist had played. Every great pianist of 50 years ago recorded for the reproducing piano, and there were thousands of titles in the catalogues. As for what performers and composers thought of such instruments, let me quote what Grieg wrote in what he thought was English to one of the makers. This ingenious invention, the welte-mignon, or the idea to use the electrical power in the service of the intelligence, has struck me with admiration. It surpasses all other essays in the way of artistical pianos. Now, if you think that no mechanical piano could live up to this praise, I want you to hear another performance, recorded on piano roll, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. A performance on piano roll of a transcription of the Blue Danube, as played by Josef Lhevinne, who was a celebrity pianist about 40 years ago. Now, how are you to know whether that authentically resembles Lhevinne's performance? Well, I have here an old gramophone record, I'm afraid a bit scratchy, played by Lhevinne. It may have been recorded years later or earlier than the piano roll, so it won't be exactly the same, but maybe it will half convince you that the one pianist played both performances. Well, now, in the days when a reproducing piano was a sort of status symbol, there were some most extraordinary demonstrations of what the machine could do. The veteran American pianist Rudolph Ganz once conducted himself playing a concerto.
They wanted to try and have a role that could be performed with orchestra. The two Liszt concertos were on the program. I sat down at the Grand with the Philharmonic and Stransky conducting, and I played the one in A major first. And then Stransky handed me the baton, and I went up to the podium where he had been and conducted my role of the duet. And people must have been so nervous. How does that machine know when to come in? that I had an electric buzzer connected with the piano. And I conducted with the right hand and buzzed with the left. Every entrance was just it. And there was a big party afterwards. There must have been over 150 artists who had come to listen to this. Nothing was told in the paper how it is done. And the people could see the keys coming up and down, just as if somebody had playing on it. No, I remember it was quite a thrill, and the trouble was at the end I had to shake hands with myself.
If you think that this sort of gimmicky performance was strictly for the peasants, let me tell you of a London performance in which the great Cortot himself played a Liszt rhapsody. At certain moments in the performance he stopped playing, and a role recorded by himself took over. It was said at the time that with your eyes closed you couldn't tell which was which. And the person who actually wrote this and had it printed in an article was Ernest Newman, not an easily hoodwinked listener. But perhaps now we've got so far, I ought to try to explain very briefly how a piano roll made the piano play itself. What was the principle of the pianola? The essence of the thing was this. The notes were worked pneumatically. On an ordinary pianola, the operator sat on the piano stool and pedalled away at a pair of bellows. On more advanced models, the suction was produced by an electric pump, and this suction worked the keys. There was a partial vacuum inside the piano. Outside the piano there was normal air pressure. Above the keyboard, taking the place of the music desk, there was a small cupboard. When you opened the doors, you found the space into which you could insert the horizontal roll of perforated paper. You snicked the roll into place, you pulled down the leading edge, rather like pulling down a roller blind, and attached it to a lower roller that rewound the paper roll. Between the two rollers there was a long horizontal bar with a slotted edge, rather like the edge of a very long mouth organ, and the paper as it moved slid over the slots and kept the air out. But in that paper there were perforations or slots corresponding to the music. When a moving slot in the paper slid over a fixed slot in the horizontal bar, there was a rush of air through the hole and through an internal pipe leading to the hammer mechanism, and the hammer hit the string. Provided the pattern of perforations was correct, the air was bound to enter the correct pipes at the correct moment and play the notes without any mistakes. Now that's what you might call basic pianola. But the improved pianola, the kind that most people bought, was equipped with levers and gadgets that allowed the happy owner to make the piano go faster and slower, louder and softer. And this gave great pleasure to would-be pianists who said to their friends, "Unfortunately, I never was properly taught, but I do know how the music ought to go." Beyond this sort of piano, there was the super machine, the reproducing piano. This was immensely expensive. Even in the 1920s it could cost £1,000. And it was expensive in upkeep, not only because each roll was dear, but because the complicated machinery needed constant attention from the service engineer. Marvellous though it was doomed. The ever-advancing gramophone, on its march towards high fidelity, could play everything, not just piano music, and it won the battle. But nowadays there are enthusiasts who reverently restore these pianos and collect rolls. And believe it or not, there's one man who's still cutting rolls. This is Mr. Gordon Iles of Ramsgate. At one time he was research and development engineer to the Aeolian company, who manufactured the Duo Art machine. There were, by the way, two great rivals to the Duo Art system. There was the German welte-mignon and the American Ampico. But if we ask Mr. Iles to explain the Duo Art system, well, you'll get the basic facts.
As long as the artist holds his finger on the note, so long the perforation continues to be cut out, and so of course the beginning of one perforation in relation to the beginning of another depends simply upon the time lapse between the striking of one key and another. In fact, as far as that goes, you must have 100% accuracy in recording. The recording piano, which was a perfectly ordinary piano in most respects, except that at various points in the piano action, electric contacts were placed, so that there would be a difference in time. For instance, if a note was struck very softly, the moment the artist's finger merely grazed the key, merely sort of touched the top of the key, as you might say, that would make one contact. Well, then another contact would take place just at the moment after the hammer had touched the string. It was actually on the hammer rebound. Now, in the case of the duo art, what were recorded were the key speeds, and those were recorded on a separate roll, apart from the actual perforations cut out or marked out. It can be quite clearly demonstrated that the key speed varies more or less directly with the degree of fortissimo employed. In other words, you would have two marks on the paper. You would have one mark commencing at the time when the pianist just simply touched the top of the key, and the second mark commencing at the time when the hammer just commenced its rebound back from the string. Therefore, softer notes would show a longer measurement in distance between the commencements of these two markings, and sort of a very loud note would be virtually simultaneous. And so, from that record, the dynamic forces required could be computed, and the perforations in the roll were cut in accordingly. On a number of occasions, and certainly in the case of where important artists were involved, they made a gramophone recording at the same time. Of course, this had the enormous advantage that not only could the studio master use the gramophone record when it came to correcting the recording, that's the duo art recording afterwards, but of course also the artist himself could hear the gramophone recording and feel quite assured that the duo art recording was in fact his work.